This meeting is being recorded.
And as well as myself, I was having some issues. I had to update the app nonetheless, but I'm so glad to be here before you today. As I said, today is my first lead, so this is the actual um, time, right, that I will get in front of a crowd to tell my story, my backstory. They say when it comes to trauma that an individual should continue to talk about their story and situation until it becomes doable and normalized in a way for them. Um, I know a lot of things throughout my life I did not really know um, what was going to happen. It was just kind of a toss up, especially given the fact that I was adopted at age 2. So very early on, things were kind of scripted for me. Society had already had it, and deep ingrained in my life, and there was only supposed to be a specific outcome given my situation. But God is amazing. I'm so blessed to have a relationship with Him. I'm so honored to have the ability to go into what they call my prayer room and to speak to Him on a very, very consistent basis. I don't think if I had that, um, that I would be here today. I know that if I didn't have that, I would not be here today. Um, and in spite of, um, I'm so grateful to have also had a best friend and brother. His name is Anthony, and we have been friends for over 20 plus years. I think it's about 25, 26 so now. And he has been my ride or die, my confidant, um, my friend when I needed a friend, my brother when I needed a brother, you know, my shelter when I needed a shelter. He's just been all of that. And you're lucky to find one in today's society. If you are blessed to find at least one, you ought to give God glory and thanks for it. Somebody come on and give the Lord a hand praise. Amen. So just, to give you a little bit of background about who I am. My name is Si're Gooden. I was born January 16th, 1990 as Angelo Wheeler at Miami Valley um, Hospital there in Dayton, right off of Patterson. And of course, uh, it takes up all of what used to be the Montgomery County Fairgrounds. But I am here today. I was born into this world abandoned as a what they would call back in the day a not home child or planned for a child, but an orphan, one that was unplanned for. It was untimely and unseemly as to when my arrival came into the fold. So when I arrived just seconds beyond good known, reason. Don't even think that my mother had a reason. She just knew she had to get me out of her and get back to what she had to do. So, with not knowing the reason, on January 16th, an ice cold Tuesday, January the 16th, I was born into this world and I was left alone and abandoned in the nursery of Miami Valley. Well, when the nurses, I suppose, figured that my mother was not coming back, they did something. They had to do something. They knew the first thing, more than anything, would be that they would have to call children's services. I was a newborn. Children's services did not take newborns, so they had to wait until I was at least, I believe, 2, because they had a lot of paperwork and things that they had to do in order for me to get into care. So I stayed in the NICU. I was a premature baby, so that helped too, kind of, in terms of the lengthy stay. And after I got out of the NICU, by that time, I guess a nurse that had been taking care of me, she fell in love with me. And she just simply could not see herself letting me go to children's services without going into the hands of the care directly straight to a family. So what she did for me was the unspeakable. She took the risk and she took the chance on me and she mothered me for 2 years. And I don't know who this woman was. I don't know what her name was. I don't know if she, well, obviously she lived in Dayton because she cared for me at the hospital, but for what reason she did it, I could never come to know. But what I know today, and having been in the seat of an individual that cares so much to make an unbiased, unselfish decision, that of which unknowingly I don't know the outcome to what may be if I choose to do, that I just do because it is directed in God's will. I don't know what was that day for her, but I know today that it was nothing but the blood of Jesus that He had over my life and the covering that He had over me, even when I was formed in my mother's womb. That when I would arrive to this earth, that the anointing would be upon me and that it would follow me, and your protection, His hedge of protection, would be sealed around me like a jail cell wall. And for that, I was so grateful. I really wish that I could have found out the individual who did that for me, because I've always wanted to thank her, because she didn't have to do that. She could have sent me straight into the care of children's services as a newborn. But again, I don't think that they took newborns. I think you had to at least be a certain number of weeks or at least 1 year old, because of the risk of your child getting sick and dying, I suppose. I'm just guessing, throwing things out there. Of course, y'all know this was back in the 90s, so we didn't have a lot to go off of. But after she did the unspeakable and the notable humanitarian task of being my mother, Teresa, she did a warm handoff to my grandmother, which was the foster family that I was fostered by until I was 3. And then I was adopted into care. So it went like this. Therese was born, well, Angelo was born. Angelo went to a care of a treating nurse and NICU nurse who gave unselfishly And then Angelo went into foster care with his grandmother, Leslie Mae Gooden. And then from Leslie Mae Gooden's care, Angelo went into the care of Leslie's daughter, Mary Frances Gooden Wheeler. And that is the lineage and line up, literally the upline of my life. From birth until the age of 16, when my mother, Mary Frances Gooden Wheeler, would die of heart failure, congestive heart failure that she suffered from since the age of 12. My mother passed when I was 16 years old. She was awaiting her third open heart surgery. And what still to this day made me so special that God would grant me things that He would throughout my life. And I'm going to tell you each wish that He gave me and that I need and that He granted, because God is so good. Nevertheless, my mother was due for a consultation at Cleveland Clinic in Cleveland, Ohio, and that was supposed to be one of the top treating organizations nationally for the American Heart Association. That was the institution that was known for the most notable research in this world when it came to cardiovascular disease. So as you know, her third open heart surgery was scary for her. Of course, she did not want to even go through the first two. But the risk that she faced the third time was much greater than the risk she faced the first. None of which we really understood as a family. All we knew is that we wanted Mother Wheeler, Sister Wheeler, Auntie, cousin, and friend to make it out of this operation and surgery without fail, as she did the first two times. That is what our family and her close friends were banking on, all that knew that she was going for another surgery under the knife again. We were hopeful because we have been granted such grace and favor the first two times. And God, He is the healer and He will do. And that is just where our faith was so strongly held, even then at that time. But despite the fact that our faith was strong, my mother felt something down under, within and inside. A conversation that she would have with God, an understanding of uncertainty, and even a sense of low security of instability, that it would work this time. This conversation wasn't known to anyone else. It was just a conversation that she had with God herself. And I would only come to know it, most pristinely know it, that it was a conversation silently held that they had together on the day that I would lose her forever. Well, see, me and my mom, we spent the entire day resting and finishing our projects, our DIY projects, so painting in the house. And she was painting in her room, and I was painting in my room. And she painted her walls blue, and I painted my walls yellow. And she painted her clouds on her walls. And I painted my border around my ceiling and wall. See, this was back during the time that we learned about sponge painting, honey. And once she figured it out and learned about a sponge and a paint, and that two could go together, from my auntie Nita, Lord rest her. So I miss you. I'm going to talk about this. That she would learn this technique from Auntie Nita. Honey, she went and she painted her clouds on her walls because she said when she came home and she laid in bed, she wanted to look at something other than a blanket. So that is what my mother did. She painted her clouds of white on her blue wall with her sponge that day, and I would finish my border of sponge around my filling on my yellow. And that was the day that we had. And then I also finished the stairwell, painted it because it was already blue when we moved. The house was bought in about, I think, 19, was built in 1950. We bought it in the 90s, I believe, when I was 5 years old. My mother bought that home, 1925 Gunther Road, and I was 5 years old. Prior to that, we stayed in Residence Park off Shenandoah. Don't remember the address of that, but I do remember that it was not, again, not too far where we moved, because when we moved the first and only time of my life, we were more close to my grandmother, which was my mother's goal than for the first time. As my grandmother aged, my mother was just one of those children that wanted to always be right there. Not only, I think, for my grandmother's safety, but for her own. And I'm glad that she did, because on the day that I would have to call my grandmother to make the call to 937-854-2739. And my grandmother would pick up that phone and I would say, Granny, Granny. And she would say, what? What's going on? I said, Granny, Mama's dead. I said, Mama's dead. She said, don't you play with me. I said, Mom, Granny, I'm not playing. I said, Mom is dead. She just died. She just fell on the kitchen floor. Hurry up and get here. Well, honey, I tell you, my granny, she didn't drive at that time, but she called my uncle on that phone. My uncle, he stayed right down Gunther, just in the opposite direction, going towards Townview and my grandmother's other home. See, my grandmother, she owned quite a few properties and some land and some plots. My grandmother, she came from Liquid Gold because they worked hard when her and my grandfather came to Ohio from Mississippi. But nevertheless, she got on that phone and she called my Uncle Leon. And I tell you, I can tell you countless times when Granny came to the house and it took her a lot longer, but that day it was like I put that phone down and my granny was there in 0.5 seconds, as well as my Uncle Leon, her brother. By the time that my grandmother got to the house, I was in the kitchen. I watched my mother come in from taking out the trash cans. Me and her both took out trash cans. She took out the first two, and I took out the last two. And this was on trash day. I would never forget it. And it was on April the 12th, 2006, that I lost her. Just 2 days before my anniversary, and I'll talk about that soon later. After I took out the trash cans, see, my mother was the individual that if she asked you to do something, she only wanted to ask you one, no more than two times. And by the third time, she would be the individual to get up and do it on her own. And I was quite the same way, as well as my grandmother, and I get it from both of them individuals. We have no patience, but more than anything, we have a set standard, an agenda in our mind, a set of expectations of which, if an individual is apt and ailing to want to assist us in any measure, if there is something that we have already best determined is good for us, and individuals that are in the position, in the seat of assisting and helping us, that they will go against the current instead of with the expectation of what's already been set, then we get very frustrated. Because what is the point of you coming to ask to help if you are not going to do what is asked of you the first time? that was simply the understanding that we had as a familial subset. But most pristinely, it was just the expectation that when I tell you to do something, ask or request of you to do something, I need you to get up and do it the first time. Well, with my mother and my grandmother, I was much more, let's just say, tenacious when it came to the urgency to move on specific things. Nevertheless, this day, my adoptive father, Ernest, he had asked me to take out the trash. And go figure, as he sat in the recliner in his chair and ate popcorn and soda and watched wrestling until he fell asleep every night, and that was his ritual when he came home from work and church. He fell in love more with that recliner than his own family. He spent more time in that recliner, in that chair after work in church than he did with his own family. I cannot make it up. We never ate a single meal at the kitchen table. And more of my life and growing up was spent seeing a man do things unspeakable to a woman, just a blessed, quiet soul, of which I watched die in front of me every day. Literally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically, I watched my mother die in front of me every single day. Nevertheless, he asked me to get up and go and take out the trash. However, this day I was watching something on TV and it was really, really good. I was into it. Y'all know how that is, honey. That got to catch me at a commercial. So it was one of those days. He asked me to take out the trash and it was at a good part. And I was like, okay, yeah, once this commercial come on, we'll get to it. Okay. And my mom, she had came just, I think, minutes after he had asked me to take out the trash. And I was like, yeah, Mom, I know. I said, once this goes off, I said, I'm going to get up and I'm going to take it out. I promise. Well, again, my mother just was that individual. She actually, the first time she really expected you to get up and do it at that point. So what does Mom do? She gets up and she does my job. And she takes out the first two trash cans. Of course, by the time that I did actually get up and make a move, there were still two trash cans that had not been taken out. But by this time, my mom was halfway up the driveway, and I went to go and retrieve the last two trash cans again to take them out to the end of the street next to our black mailbox with 1925. And by the time that I got back up the driveway, I watched my mother. She looked up to the sky and she just stood and she looked at the sky. She said no words. There was no indication of any risk, right, or symptoms or signs of stroke or anything that was about to take place. No falls, no nothing. She just stood and she looked up and she watched. She looked at the sky, and then she got to the steps there, the back staircase, and she sat on the stairs just for a little minute as well, and then she looked up again to the sky. She said no words. She just looked up again to the sky. And I watched her. I said, Mom, I said, didn't I tell you not to do my job? Mom, didn't I tell you not to do my job? She said no words. She got up. She turned around and she walked in the room. I was behind her, just probably less than even arm's reach of 100 feet. Well, she got right there by the refrigerator. The sink was on the left-hand side, refrigerator was on the right-hand side, the stove was right in front of her, right there, and she was turning the corner by the green garbage can and the refrigerator on the right refrigerator on the white right-hand side was white, green trash can, white stove, collapsed. Right before my mother went down, her eyes rolled into the back of her head, and her knees buckled. She yelled and she screamed, "Iris!" And that was the last thing that my mother said. She would call upon the man that would literally be the reason that I would find myself 35 years later in a colossal fuck of confusion, disappointment, resentment, disillusionment, abandonment, insecurity, inferiority, most profoundly, disenfranchisement of a familiar bond that should have been securely one that took me, nurtured me, guided me, one that I could even still call on and see as being a firm foundation in my life and in my future growth and development. She called upon the man who would break almost every commandment that God had given his children back in the biblical times in the First Testament. The man that would get up in front of a church every Sunday to preach a word, but would be the biggest hypocrite that would not live a single one out throughout the week. The man that would break my mother's heart over and over again due to the vices of infidelity, due to the vices of outside of her own will or help, mental illness, intellectual disability, lack of understanding. I would come to know that not only because he was a Taurus, or they're just known to be inflexible souls, that his spirit to his very core was one that was. That yes, God created human, he created man, and created woman to be together. But unfortunately, the union between him and my mother was not one that was God sent. It was really most notably a work of art that was very far from a masterpiece that God ever could have had in mind for my mother, but one that she created and ultimately became a complete disaster and catastrophe. Because not only her own life would be affected, but that she would drag in another individual, an innocent child, who would also be damaged as well. So for years, for many years, for at least 15 plus years, because remember, I only had my mother for 16. So for 15 years of my upbringing, I got to see a man ignore a woman, talk down to a woman, manipulate a woman, womanize a woman. He never physically hit her. I can say that out of all the years. He never physically put his hands on my mother, but I think he came close one time, and I said, I wish you would. I wish you would. Yeah, I was that individual child that was, nevertheless, even despite me and my mom's disagreements, I was that child that really was about my mom. And she was that mother that was about me. And none of what we ever went through on this world or earth together, none of it was without understanding and knowing that we was going to be there in each other's corner. I'm on the basic plan, guys, and I have 5 minutes left. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up in this next 5 minutes. So the last name that my mother would call would be his name. And unfortunately, that was the last conversation that I would have with my mother. The last words that I would have with my mother was, Mom, didn't I tell you not to do my job? And her last words would be the name of the man who completely destroyed our lives. I had to sit with that all of my life from age 16 even up until now. I despise my mother. For that, I was hurt for many years because of that. I felt I was not loved. I felt like my mother did not love me. Because in that moment, the last name that she called was not mine. I was the one standing behind her. How could you call the man's name that hurt you, that destroyed both of our lives? How could you call upon him for help? I was right there, mother. But it was not about that. I will only come to find that years later, after me and God, we would do some deep soul searching, working through the trauma bond. That I would come to understand that it was reason that my mother did not call upon me. She did not call upon me because she did not have to worry about me. She called upon the man, the name for which she worried about daily, if he would be okay. It was without question, it was without fail that I knew that my mother cared for me like no other mother could. My mother spent more time trying to find remedies and cures of ways to fix and improve me and bring me to a better health and level so that I could be created as equal in this society during her time on earth for what she could in the 15 years that she did in any other life. I was a work of art. I was a child that not only had ADHD, but I was also a little society. Honey, if I did not like you, you could rest be sure you would spend 8 hours or more the entire day dealing with my antics, my shenanigans, and honey, I was the road runner, so you better get ready to work it out. Honey, we are going for the 100-meter dash all the way to the 1500, and I might even take you around the track for a good Kentucky Derby. 2 teachers, of which my mother and my grandmother were only securely trusting and believing in my upbringing was Mrs. Ewings and Mrs. Taylor at Oliveville Elementary School. Yeah, I grew up off of Gunther. My grandma lived on Schroeder. I lived on Gunther. And off of Little Richmond was on one end, and off Hoover was the other end. Anyway, you go up either one of those, and it will run you straight into Olive Road. Turn left or right on Olive Road, go down about 1,600 feet, depending on what side you're coming from. Anyway, in the middle of Olive Road, there's a nice, long, like, branched out school called Oliveville Elementary, and that is where I went for many, many years. I went there from first grade, well, no, second grade till 8th grade. And then 8th grade, oh no, Out of it, I went from there from second grade to sixth grade, and then middle school was seventh and eighth grade, and then high school was from ninth to 12th. So that was my lineage in line. Nevertheless, my mother, she died when I was 16. My grandmother, I would have her for 12, 13 plus years after my mother died. That my grandmother would go when I was 28. My mother went when I was 16 years old in 2006, April the 12th. My grandmother would die, like I said, 12, 13 years later. I'm not good at math, so don't judge me